Super Mario RPG is one of the most iconic and best games of the 90s, a claim I don't think any fan of PSX JRPGs will disagree with. It came out in 1996, but I didn't get around to playing it until January of this year. You see, I didn't have a ton of Nintendo games growing up, and as such, I've only started going through Nintendo's back catalog since 2020. This year I finally got around to Super Mario RPG, and it is literally one of the best PSX JRPGs I've ever played. So much so, I would probably put it in my top 25 of the decade. It's that good. I played it on the SNES Classic, never anticipating a remake or port of the game would be coming to modern hardware. And no, I'm not counting the subscription service Nintendo has, since I find it super predatory to lock games behind subscription services. Color me surprised that Super Mario RPG Remake would be announced a couple months ago. And what's more, it was coming out in 2023. It's not often in the modern gaming landscape a game is announced and released the same year, and I was hyped to play the game again. Although I would be lying to say there wasn't some level of trepidation in regards to the graphics. I like retro looking games, and personally I think Super Mario RPG still looks great, with some top of the line sprite work for the time. That's not to say it's perfect, as there are definitely some eye-straining hues of greens within it. By and large, Super Mario RPG Remake is a bit more consistent in its presentation of zones, but graphical upgrades aren't necessarily a net positive in my book, and graphics are only one aspect of any game. To be honest, graphics are one of the least important aspects of a game, with the only exception being if the game looks egregiously ugly, like to the point of being impossible to ignore. In this video, I'm going to juxtapose the original and remake versions of Super Mario RPG, answering the question, which one is better by the end. Welcome to this Rail Deal review. Let's get started. Growing up, I heard my father say, graphics don't matter if the story is good, many times in regards to PS1 games after the 6th generation was gaining steam. And he's right about this, something that even as a child I recognized was true. In accepting and internalizing this philosophy, I had the privilege of enjoying some of the best games ever made, such as Final Fantasy VII. This is probably why I've never had a major issue with graphics growing up, something that has continued into adulthood. I'm open to games looking old, and it was because of this I was able to enjoy the way Super Mario RPG told its story. There's nothing super impressive or genre defining going on within the plot of this game, but there are a few things Nintendo did to make the game stand out amongst its Squaresoft contemporaries. The expressiveness of the characters' faces matters a lot, but more so than that, Super Mario RPG added a quirky aspect where Mario would shape change into other characters to act out whatever he would be saying to the other characters. This is a super interesting and unique aspect to the storytelling of this game, adding a lot of charm to the presentation of the story. For those of you unaware, Super Mario RPG follows Mario as he quests through the Mushroom Kingdom and adjoining lands to discover the 7 stars, stars that provide the world with wishes. It's a timed contest with the Smithy Gang, a group of interdimensional robots hell-bent on taking over the Mario world. This extraplanar threat is what brings the disparate characters of Super Mario RPG together, including the King Koopa himself, Bowser. Over the course of the game, these characters interact consistently with one another, growing closer as a team and as individuals through each trial and tribulation. Super Mario RPG Remake does a great job of moving these scenes over, and something the remake does better than the original is the way it uses simply amazing cutscenes to add to the scenes that play out in major plot moments. Abstraction is a key and important part of storytelling in the PSX era JRPG, but Super Mario RPG Remake doesn't need to preserve those abstractions. While I like how the original portrays events given the technical limitations of the time, the remake does a far better job at making the story fun to watch play out. I almost wish they would have had more of these over the course of the game's runtime because of how nice of an inclusion they are. That being said, both of these games rely a lot on text boxes to tell their story through, since the remake doesn't add voice acting. In this particular aspect, the original Super Mario RPG is more enjoyable to read, simply because it has better text boxes, paired with better text. This might be a minor thing, and in some ways it kinda is, but as we'll see moving forward through this review, some small things like this begin to add up, becoming major issues with the remake. Reading is such a core aspect of Super Mario RPG's design that text boxes need to look aesthetically pleasant. Consider the difference between reading a book with yellow, worn pages to crisp, clean pages. Reading on the clean paper is more pleasant, which is similar to how I feel about the text boxes in the original Super Mario RPG over its remake. While graphics do matter less than story, they still matter up to a certain point. Super Mario RPG Remake has some pretty nice graphics, and I was immediately impressed with the way they were able to convert the characters over from the original, fixing their models enough to make Mario not look like he's remembering the trenches of World War I. In fact, the character animations have had the biggest overhaul in the remake, with Mario's run looking far more natural than it did in 1996. Nintendo have extended the scope of each of Super Mario RPG's levels in that they show more of the area beyond the confines of the playable space. In the original, it was like each map functioned as a diorama where Mario moved around on top, like it was some kind of playset. Extending these boundaries with environmental features makes feeling a part of the Mario world and mythos much easier. Something the original did pretty well as well, though I do think I would have gotten more invested in Mario's world if the original looked closer to this. The original's look was enough to get me into the Mario plus Luigi series, but I knew from the moment I started Superstar Saga that a fully realized world needs that world to take up the full screen. Otherwise, it is a little immersion breaking, which is something the remake fixes here. That being said, the remake loses some points for the constant stutters. I've not watched any other reviews, so I don't know if anyone else has encountered this, but sometimes while moving through the environment or jumping, there will be this weird frame stutter around some of the objects in the world, and it is always distracting, and even worse than that, it actually hurts my eyes a little bit. This isn't the only aspect of the performance that seems a little off, though I couldn't place what other things about the performance were impacting my play experience negatively. By not being able to place it, I mean I can't articulate what it is about them that rubs me the wrong way. Graphics and art direction are two extremely different things. While Super Mario RPG Remake has far better graphics, I do think Super Mario RPG Original is more visually consistent. Consistency doesn't mean better graphics. I must reiterate that here though. When I see anything in the original, I think, yeah, that looks right in this world, whereas sometimes as I look around the remake, I would think, wow, that looked kinda odd here. This happened with Booster's teeth, for instance, and for Bowser's crying animation. The crying animation for Bowser in the original is far, far better. This is something I constantly thought about whenever Bowser was on stage. In the color palette department, the remake gets another big plus here in that it fixes one of my biggest issues with the original, the goddamned greens. The green for some of the forested areas in the original is just absolute tosh. Navigation matters a lot too in these games, and since Mario has always been a platformer, there were bound to be some platforming elements in Super Mario RPG. In both versions, the platforming is clunky, but I did find the original a bit better in this regard, controls aside. For some reason, the remake's platforming felt extremely slippery to me, despite there being no ice surface effect in place anywhere in the game. I suspect this is a purely psychological problem. It just feels weird to me. Platforming was bad in the original, but it also felt like it fit the game, whereas it doesn't feel that way in the remake. Possibly because of the way the remake looks, and I think I subconsciously expect the platforming to feel more modern when it really doesn't. Something that didn't need to feel more modern is Super Mario RPG's combat, which has aged like a fine wine. The combat in Super Mario RPG is a revolutionary shakeup to the prototypical turn-based JRPG gameplay loop, allowing the player to press a button at the right moment to gain more power. At the time, JRPGs were primarily ATB based, so changing it up with this action input gameplay truly made Super Mario RPG stand out. Later games such as The Legend of Dragoon and this year's Sea of Stars also use this combat design. And while up to this point I've made a spattering of criticisms and positive things to say about both the original and remake versions of Super Mario RPG, it's at this point in the video where I'm about to get very negative on the remake. The remake adds a lot of mechanics to the combat, which is not on its own a bad thing. However, it becomes a bad thing when the game is not designed for these mechanics. Firstly, let me break down each of the new combat mechanics, and then afterward I'll explain why I don't think these mechanics work in Super Mario RPG Remake, even though they are actually pretty good mechanics in concept. In addition to being able to increase the damage of your attacks with a perfectly timed input, you're also able to reduce damage by blocking at the right time. One thing the remake adds to this block mechanic is a perfect block thing, where if you press the button at the exact right time, you take no damage. This actually might have been a mechanic in the original, I have no idea, and the reason I don't know is because activating it isn't telegraphed the way it is in the remake. With an exclamation point, the game tells the player exactly what time to hit a perfect hit or perfect block, making both much easier to do. Even crazier than this is that Super Mario RPG Remake also adds an overpowered AoE effect, where hitting the attack button at the right time will create an AoE effect to that attack, hitting all enemies in the battle. This usually results in killing all enemies within one single action, including the adds bosses have. This means you have no reason to use any of your special abilities outside of fights where there is only one opponent, and even then there are so many situations where just basic attacking is still the best option. Yeah, you heard that right. Super Mario RPG Remake is a one-button combat system. You only need to attack and block, and you'll never be able to lose. Having no chance of losing is a bad thing. Being able to perfect block things while also getting superpowered AoE attacks like this breaks the gameplay system. If a system like this exists and gives the player godhood gained through practice and determination, that's one thing, but in Super Mario RPG Remake, it's just given to the player with super generous timings for both mechanics. I wish I could say the added combat mechanics end there, but we're just getting started. In addition to perfect blocks and AoE standard attacks, the remake has a battle gauge mechanic and triple attack super mechanic. The battle gauge works in tandem with perfect block and AoE attack mechanics, filling up more if the player abuses these abilities. And you'll want to fill this gauge constantly too, because when it's at 100%, you can cash it in to use a triple attack. These kind of work the way the all-out attack mechanic works in Persona 5, where your assembled crew combines and attack together to deal massive damage, super buff the party, or mass heal. This means you can enter a boss fight and deal over 200 points of damage in the first turn, and 200 points of damage is a ton in Super Mario RPG, especially since you can deal that amount of damage by the time you get to the third star. Obviously, Nintendo balanced the bosses around this mechanic, right? No, they did not. There's no balance in Super Mario RPG Remake. This essentially means that bosses have roughly 50% or less of their total health after your first turn. It's ridiculous, and not in a fun way. So clearly, with the way all of these mechanics are in the player's favor, they didn't make the game easier in other ways, right? Well, you see, they added autosaves at the beginning of every location, meaning that if you have an aneurysm preventing you from playing the game to a level of base competency, you'll just be set back a couple of seconds. I wish I could say it stops there, but wait, there's more.
But wait! There's more!
The remake has a character swapping mechanic from Final Fantasy X, where you're able to switch characters out mid-fight. Now, I like this mechanic, but this basically means you have access to all possible triple attacks at any given time, meaning you can get anything you want whenever you want. The game is brain dead easy through these mechanics, and it's a shame because these mechanics in concept aren't bad. The power gauge, perfect block, AoE attacks, character swapping, and triple attack mechanics are all great on paper, and they would have been great innovations for a Super Mario RPG 2. But this isn't a game designed around these mechanics, meaning they break the gameplay, ruining any possible enjoyment in that gameplay. It's not like the original was a difficult game, so why are these mechanics here? The 1996 game is balanced around its mechanics, making each combat encounter feel great. This creates a nice difficulty curve, meaning a game over was possible, albeit unlikely. I got one game over in my playthrough of the original back in January, and it was against the Axel Rangers. There's an order to the Rangers you've got to kill them in order to make the fight easier, and since I play games guideless, it took me a failed attempt to figure out which one to nuke down first in my second attempt. You know what happened in the remake version of this fight? I killed them all in 2 or 3 cycles of my characters. Something that shows up in my annotations consistently is "so boring," all in caps. That's the best way I can describe the remake, and it's because of difficulty. This is where we've got to talk about difficulty in games, obviously focusing on the remake. At the start of the game, the player is given the choice between standard difficulty and an easier one, and to be honest, I don't understand how anyone could enjoy the easier difficulty. The box standard difficulty is already infantilizingly easy as is. I'm just tired of difficulty modes in general. From Software has shown that difficulty modes just aren't necessary with the way they've designed Dark Souls, Elden Ring, Armored Core 6, and all the rest. Now hold your keyboard warrior hands, because I'm not saying games should be as hard as a Souls game. But what I mean is that those games are designed around one difficulty setting, and as a result, the game is balanced, fair, and just right. I remember when difficulty settings were something limited to PC games only, like 1993's Doom or Age of Empires. It was a nice little feature back then, but even those games weren't entirely balanced. RTS games had a nasty habit of creating difficulty by allowing the AI to cheat, giving them resources they didn't earn. Doom is perhaps the only game series I've ever seen to do difficulty modes right because of the way the developers associated difficulty with number of enemies, not some other metric of inflated difficulty through tedious things like spongy health bars. Easy games are forgettable experiences because it is an overwhelming struggle that we grow a deeper emotional connection to a game. The first game I ever played was Mega Man X. Mega Man X is not an easy game, and as a child, I never beat it. But games don't need to be beaten to be enjoyed. Arcades and free-to-play games are based on this concept. They are made to be fun, with no necessity to beat them. In Mega Man X, I played the same 2 or 3 levels over and over again, never being able to beat them. Why is this game so easy? Like, the remake is easier than Paper Mario. You know, the game that was supposed to be an easier version of Super Mario RPG so younger kids could enjoy it? Yeah, this remake is like 3 times easier than Paper Mario or Super Paper Mario. So now I've got to answer the question. Which one is better? If it weren't obvious by now, I find 1996 Super Mario RPG to be the better, more consistent game overall, and if I ever want to revisit the story again, the original is the way I'm going to choose to do so. Though I will look up those excellent cutscenes again because they really are the best thing about the remake. And this is where I've got to talk a little more about whether I recommend Super Mario RPG Remake or not. I might prefer the original, but what if you have trouble getting over the retro graphics and feel? What if you refuse to pay into Nintendo's subscription services to access the original? Should you play the remake? It's a tricky question to answer because if those things describe you, the remake is the only legal way to experience this game to any degree. I honestly still couldn't recommend Super Mario RPG Remake though, and I would say that it would be better for you to just watch a long play on YouTube of either version instead of subjecting yourself to this boring update to a SNES masterpiece. But let's say you loved Super Mario RPG as a kid and now you're trying to decide whether or not to get the remake for your own kid because you want them to experience the joy of the story just like you did. If that's you, let me explain it this way. I don't like Super Mario RPG Remake. It's a super subpar version of the Super Mario RPG experience, and I personally will not be playing it again or recommending anyone I know to buy it. However, I'm not selling or trading my copy of the remake, and the reason why that is because I'm going to keep it around for my kids. I could see the remake being a 10 out of 10 perfect experience for the baby gamer, the 4 to 7 year old that is extremely new to games. The story genuinely holds up, and I plan to try and get my kids interested in games from this era early on because enjoying the story requires that they read the story. Pairing learning with fun is an absolute must, and I think this game would be a great teaching tool for reading, story design, characterization, and basic gameplay mechanics. And in this way, I could see my future kids loving this game. And it could open doors for them to enjoy other PSX JRPGs like Final Fantasy IX. This will come at the cost that they will not play the amazing original, but perhaps that is something they would be interested in doing as they got older. In this way, Super Mario RPG Remake could be a great way to front load and introduce your kids to this style of game. If this were targeted towards younger kids and designed with that in mind, say like 4 to 7 year olds, then a lot of my complaints are inconsequential. In this example, I'm not the target audience, and you can't get mad that a game doesn't cater to your personal interests if you're not in the target audience. However, from the promotional materials, it really feels like Super Mario RPG Remake is supposed to be for fans of the original, and in that context, the 2023 version fails to be a good or recommendable product. And that's the video, guys. How are you feeling about Super Mario RPG Remake? What games do you plan to use as ways of getting your kids into gaming? Let me know in the comments below, and if you'd like to hear me talk about a variety of gaming topics or chat with me through the comment section of one of my streams, make sure to subscribe and ding that notification bell for more really comprehensive gaming content. Have an awesome day, gamers!